Wisdom, wisdom, that's the test. Which rival wisdom team is best? 52 teams of 8 antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate and entertain generations for centuries.
Team 9 Courageous Service. Quote definitions, biographical context and synergy analysis helps. Replace hate with motivational education that may guidealife.com. Quote 9.1. Until we are all free, we are none of us free. Emma Lazarus, 1849 to 1887. Quote definition. Freedom is not a private possession that individuals can secure for themselves while others remain oppressed. It is a collective condition. Partial freedom is a form of shared unfreedom, and the liberation of any one group is incomplete until it extends to all. Quote application. The mission of ReplaceHate.org cannot be satisfied by making some communities wiser and kinder while others remain trapped in hatred and ignorance. Lazarus's principle demands that the work extend to everyone, because a society in which some people are degraded by hatred is a society in which no one is truly free from its consequences. Emma Lazarus was born in 1849 into a wealthy Sephardic Jewish family in New York City, a family whose American roots stretched back to the colonial era. She was educated privately, began publishing poetry as a teenager, and was recognized by Ralph Waldo Emerson as a significant talent before she turned 20. For much of her early career, she wrote refined, classical verse and seemed destined for a comfortable literary life insulated from political urgency. Then, in 1881 and 1882, the pogroms began in Russia. Tens of thousands of Jewish refugees flooded into New York, many arriving at Castle Garden in conditions of desperate poverty. Lazarus threw herself into relief work, visited the refugee camps on Ward's Island, and was transformed by what she saw. The experience radicalized her poetry. She began writing with a new urgency about Jewish identity, the history of persecution, and the meaning of America as a refuge. Work that culminated in the 1883 sonnet, The New Colossus, written to raise funds for the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. Its final lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," were engraved on the statue's base in 1903 and became the defining expression of America's promise to the world. Lazarus died of cancer in 1887 at 38, before she could see her words inscribed on the monument she had helped fund. But the principle she articulated, that no one's freedom is secure while others remain oppressed, was the animating conviction of her brief, brilliant, transformed life. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Understand personal freedom as inseparable from the freedom of others, especially those most vulnerable. 2. Reject the temptation to secure comfort for oneself while remaining indifferent to others' oppression. 3. Treat the liberation of the most marginalized as a prerequisite for the freedom of all, including the privileged. 4. Act on behalf of others' freedom as a matter of self-interest as much as moral obligation, because their chains diminish everyone. Emma Lazarus did not write The New Colossus from a distance. She had visited the refugee camps, learned the stories, and let those encounters break through the insulation of her privilege. Her transformation from comfortable poet to passionate advocate for the dispossessed was itself a demonstration of her own principle, that the suffering of others was not separable from her own condition as a free person.
Quote 9.2. The best protection any woman can have is courage. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 1815 to 1902. Quote definition. Courage, the willingness to act rightly despite fear, opposition, and personal cost, provides a more reliable and dignified protection than any external authority, social convention, or institutional safeguard. Quote application. For anyone engaged in the work of replacing hate, which guarantees criticism, resistance, and occasional hostility, Stanton's prescription is essential. Courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to act anyway, and it is the one protection that cannot be revoked by those who wish you harm. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born in 1815 in Johnstown, New York, the daughter of a prominent judge who made no secret of his disappointment that she was not a son. She responded to that disappointment by becoming one of the most formidable intellects and political organizers of the 19th century. In 1848, she co-organized the Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's rights convention in American history, and drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, which adapted the Declaration of Independence to argue that all men and women are created equal. She spent the next 50 years as the leading theorist and strategist of the American women's suffrage movement, collaborating for decades with Susan B. Anthony in one of the most consequential political partnerships in U.S. history. Stanton faced opposition not only from the expected adversaries, conservative politicians, clergy, and newspaper editors, but from within reform movements she had helped build, including abolitionists who believed women's suffrage would complicate the fight for racial equality, and later suffragists who found her too radical in her critiques of religion and marriage. She remained undeterred. Her declaration that courage was the best protection a woman could have was not abstract advice. It was the distilled lesson of a lifetime spent advancing claims that the powerful majority insisted were inappropriate, premature, and dangerous. She kept making them anyway, and she was right. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Recognize courage as an active, chosen practice rather than an innate personality trait some people have and others lack. 2. Prioritize internal conviction over external permission. The approval of others is unreliable. Courage is always available. 3. Understand that the work of social change requires ongoing courage precisely because it threatens comfortable arrangements. 4. Treat the experience of opposition as confirmation that something important is being challenged, not as a reason to retreat. Stanton lived to 86 and kept writing and speaking until near the end of her life. She did not live to see women vote. The 19th Amendment was ratified 18 years after her death, but she had spent 50 years making that outcome inevitable through the courage of her sustained advocacy. The protection she prescribed was the protection she relied upon every day of her working life, and it never failed her.
Quote 9.3. Honest people don't hide their deeds. Emily Brontë, 1818 to 1848. Quote definition. Transparency is the natural companion of integrity. Those who act honestly have nothing to conceal. The impulse to hide actions is itself evidence of a conscience that knows those actions cannot withstand scrutiny. Quote application. For a mission grounded in truth and wisdom, this principle is foundational. ReplaceHate.org's work, its methods, its sources, its intentions, can and should operate in plain sight. Transparency is not just an ethical posture. It is proof of the honesty of the mission itself. Emily Jane Brontë was born in 1818 in Thornton, Yorkshire, the fifth of 6 children of an Anglican clergyman. The family moved to Haworth when Emily was 2, and she spent almost her entire short life on the Yorkshire moors that became the landscape of her imagination. She was extraordinarily private, refusing positions as a teacher and governess, resisting all attempts to draw her into literary society, and published her one novel, Wuthering Heights, in 1847 under the male pseudonym Ellis Bell, partly to protect her privacy and partly because female authors were not taken seriously. She died of tuberculosis in December 1848, just 14 months after the novel's publication, at 30 years of age, never knowing that Wuthering Heights would be recognized as one of the greatest novels in the English language. Emily Brontë wrote about concealment, secrecy, and the moral consequences of hidden lives with the authority of someone who had thought deeply about what it means to live with integrity in a world that punishes transparency. Wuthering Heights is saturated with secrets, hidden origins, concealed marriages, suppressed identities, and the novel's entire moral architecture traces the destruction that follows when people hide what they are and what they have done. Her observation that honest people don't hide their deeds is the quiet thesis of her masterwork, stated plainly in a way the novel demonstrates dramatically across 3 generations of human consequence. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Use the test of transparency as a practical guide to ethical decision-making. Would you be comfortable if this were visible? 2. Recognize the impulse to conceal as a signal worth taking seriously. What is your conscience telling you? 3. Build habits of openness that make honesty the default rather than the effortful exception. 4. Understand that transparency creates trust over time in a way that even well-intentioned concealment cannot. Emily Brontë herself was the most private of people, but she was also scrupulously honest. She did not pretend her novel was something other than what it was. She did not misrepresent her sources or her intentions. She did not hide the darkness in her story behind false reassurance. Her privacy was personal, not moral evasion. She demonstrated in her own life the distinction her quote draws. Concealment driven by integrity is different from concealment driven by guilt, and honest people, even very private ones, don't hide their deeds.
Quote 9.4. I like to praise and reward loudly, to blame quietly. Catherine II, 1729 to 1796. Quote definition. Effective leadership and human development are served by public recognition of what is good and private correction of what needs improvement, a method that builds dignity, preserves motivation, and creates conditions in which people are willing to hear honest feedback. Quote application. For anyone sharing wisdom, teaching, or building community around kinder values, Catherine's method is the practical standard for constructive influence. Public praise builds people up and signals what is valued. Private correction protects dignity and makes the corrected person more, not less, likely to change. Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst was a minor German princess who arrived in Russia at 14 to marry the heir to the Russian throne, a neurotic, unstable man who became Peter III. She taught herself Russian, converted to Russian Orthodoxy, took the name Catherine, and spent 17 years studying, reading, and building alliances while her husband ruled incompetently and alienated virtually everyone around him. In 1762, 6 months into Peter's reign, Catherine orchestrated a palace coup with the support of the Imperial Guard, deposed her husband, who died shortly afterward under unclear circumstances, and became Empress of Russia, one of the most powerful rulers in the world, at 33. She ruled for 34 years, modernizing Russia's legal code, expanding its territory, promoting Enlightenment thought, founding schools and hospitals, and corresponding personally with Voltaire, Diderot, and D'Alembert. She was called Catherine the Great not by her own proclamation, but by the consensus of her era. Her principle of praising loudly and blaming quietly was not sentimental management advice. It was the hard-won operating method of a woman who had survived a dangerous court, built loyalty across a vast empire, and understood that human motivation responds to dignity far more reliably than to humiliation. She had been on the receiving end of public degradation as a young wife at Peter's court, and she knew precisely what it did to the spirit. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Make public recognition of good work and good character a deliberate, consistent practice, not an afterthought. 2. Deliver criticism and correction privately as a default, protecting the dignity of the person receiving it. 3. Understand that the method of feedback shapes whether it is heard, absorbed, and acted upon. 4. Apply this principle in families, classrooms, workplaces, and communities as a universal standard of humane leadership. Catherine applied this principle even to her most famous enemies. When Pugachev led the largest peasant revolt in Russian history against her rule, she eventually had him captured, tried, and executed, but she insisted the execution be swift and relatively humane compared to the tortures customary for such crimes, and she limited public discussion of the revolt to reduce its influence as a model for future rebellion. Even in the most extreme circumstances, she managed the public dimension of human behavior with strategic care for its effects on dignity and motivation.
Quote 9.5. Goals help you overcome short-term problems. Hannah More 1745 to 1833. Quote definition. A clearly held long-term goal provides the perspective and motivation necessary to endure, navigate, and move past the immediate difficulties that would otherwise derail or defeat you. Quote application. The work of replacing hate with wisdom is full of short-term problems, slow progress, resistance, setbacks, and discouragement. Hannah More's insight is the practical prescription. Keep the long-term mission clearly in view, because goal clarity is what allows short-term obstacles to be seen as temporary rather than terminal. Hannah More was born in 1745 near Bristol, England, the fourth of 5 daughters of a schoolmaster who gave all his daughters an unusually thorough education for the era. She showed such exceptional academic ability that her sisters opened a school in Bristol partly to support her continued learning, and she became one of its leading teachers. In her 20s, she moved to London and was embraced by the leading literary and intellectual figures of the day. Samuel Johnson, David Garrick, Edmund Burke, and Joshua Reynolds among them, as a playwright, poet, and conversationalist of real distinction. Then, in her late 30s, she underwent a religious conversion that redirected her enormous energy from literary society toward social reform. For the next 50 years, Moore pursued some of the most consequential social work in British history. She co-founded the Clapham sect with William Wilberforce, the evangelical reform network that drove the abolition of the British slave trade. She established Sunday schools in rural Somerset that taught poor children to read at a time when literacy for the laboring classes was considered socially dangerous. She wrote cheap repository tracts, short moral pamphlets sold for a penny that reached millions of working-class readers, as a counter to the radical political literature circulating after the French Revolution. She did all of this while navigating fierce opposition from local landowners, hostile clergy, and critics who attacked her from every political direction. Her goal, the improvement of the moral and material condition of the poor, was clear enough and important enough to carry her through every short-term problem that arose. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Define long-term goals with enough clarity and importance that they function as a compass in difficult moments. 2. Reframe short-term problems as navigational challenges rather than fundamental obstacles to progress. 3. Return regularly to the goal as an act of intentional perspective, what matters most in the long run. 4. Invest in goal setting as a practical skill, not a motivational exercise. Goals are working tools for endurance. Hannah More lived to 88 and remained productive and engaged until near the end of her life. She had faced more short-term problems in her reform career than most people face in a lifetime. Financial difficulties, clerical opposition, illness, political attacks, and personal betrayals. She overcame them all by keeping her goals in view. At her death, she left a fortune of £30,000, almost all of which went to charitable and educational causes, a final expression of the goals that had governed her entire adult life.
Quote 9.6. Reject hatred without hating. Mary Baker Eddy 1821–1910. Quote definition. It is possible, and necessary, to oppose hatred actively and completely without adopting the emotional state, the methods, or the dehumanizing logic of hatred itself. The rejection of hatred must be practiced in a way that does not reproduce what it resists. Quote application. This is perhaps the most practically difficult principle in the entire Replace Hate.org mission, and the most essential. The temptation to meet hatred with hatred, contempt with contempt, is constant. Eddy's instruction is that the mission succeeds only when the rejection itself is free of the poison it opposes. Mary Baker Eddy was born in 1821 in Bow, New Hampshire, into a Calvinist family and spent her early decades marked by chronic illness, personal loss, and a series of painful life experiences, including the death of her first husband, the abandonment of her son, and years of poverty and physical suffering. In 1866, following a serious injury from a fall on ice, she reported a sudden and complete recovery after reading an account of Jesus' healing in the New Testament, an experience she described as the founding moment of her discovery of Christian Science. She spent the next decade developing her ideas, published Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures in 1875, founded the Church of Christ, Scientist in 1879, and established the Christian Science Monitor in 1908, at 87 years of age, as a newspaper dedicated to ethical, accurate journalism without sensationalism. Eddy's principle of rejecting hatred without hating emerged from a theological and practical conviction that hatred, even hatred directed at genuine evil, contaminates the person who holds it and undermines the effectiveness of any reform. She had lived through enough personal suffering and public attack to know that responses grounded in anger and contempt tend to generate more of what they oppose, while responses grounded in principled calm tend to transform it. Her own career was marked by fierce opposition, critics, defectors, legal challenges, and sustained public attacks, and her consistent response was to address the behavior firmly while refusing to adopt the emotional posture of her attackers. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Distinguish clearly between opposing harmful ideas and behaviors versus adopting hatred as a motivating emotion. 2. Recognize that hatred in response to hatred reproduces the cycle rather than breaking it. 3. Develop the discipline of principled opposition, firm in what is rejected, free from the emotional toxin of hate. 4. Understand that the method of opposition is as important as its target. How you fight matters as much as what you fight. The Christian Science Monitor, which Eddy founded in her late 80s, was explicitly designed as a demonstration of this principle applied to journalism. In an era of yellow journalism and sensationalist reporting, she insisted on factual, measured, non-inflammatory reporting, rejecting the media culture of outrage and contempt while still covering the world's genuine problems honestly. The paper has won multiple Pulitzer Prizes and remains one of the most respected publications in American journalism. Rejecting hatred without hating produced, in Eddy's case, an institution that outlasted her by more than a century.
Quote 9.7. I want you to understand that your first duty is to humanity. Sarah Breedlove, Madam C.J. Walker, 1867 to 1919. Quote definition. Before any other loyalty to family, community, race, nation, or creed, the primary obligation of every person is to the whole of humanity. Service to humanity is not one duty among many. It is the foundational duty from which all others derive their meaning. Quote application. This is the clearest possible statement of the mission that underlies replacehate.org. Not service to a tribe, a faction, or a demographic, but service to humanity as a whole. Breedlove earned the right to say this because she lived it, and she said it to an audience of Black women at a time when America was telling them their humanity itself was conditional. Sarah Breedlove was born in 1867 on a Louisiana cotton plantation to parents who had been enslaved, the first child in her family born free after the Emancipation Proclamation. Both parents died before she was 7. She was orphaned, passed between relatives, married at 14 to escape an abusive household, widowed at 20 with a 2-year-old daughter, and worked as a washerwoman in St. Louis for nearly 2 decades, earning barely enough to keep herself and her daughter alive. In her late 30s, she began developing hair care products for Black women, built a sales organization of over 20,000 agents, and became the first self-made female millionaire in American history. Not through inheritance, not through marriage, but through her own intelligence, discipline, and refusal to accept the limitations others imposed on her. She adopted the name Madam C.J. Walker and used her fortune in ways that matched her stated principle: funding anti-lynching legislation lobbying, supporting the NAACP, donating to Black schools and YMCAs, and establishing a culture within her business empire that explicitly emphasized women's economic independence and civic responsibility. The line about duty to humanity was delivered to her sales agents, women who had often come from backgrounds as desperate as her own, as both an expectation and an elevation. She was telling them that their success carried a responsibility larger than themselves, and that they were capable of meeting it. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Place service to the whole of humanity as the primary ethical framework, above narrower tribal loyalties. 2. Understand personal success as carrying with it an obligation to the broader human community. 3. Reject the logic that limits moral concern to one's own group while treating others' suffering as irrelevant. 4. Act on the duty to humanity not as an abstract principle, but as a concrete daily practice of service and advocacy. Sarah Breedlove Walker died in 1919 at 51. Having packed several lifetimes of work and impact into her brief years of success. She was building a new home, Luaro on the Hudson River, not as a monument to personal wealth, but as a gathering place for Black artists, intellectuals, and leaders when she died of kidney failure. Her estate was used exactly as her principle demanded. The majority of it went to educational institutions, charitable organizations, and the ongoing support of the women who had built their livelihoods through her company. Her first duty to humanity was the last thing she acted on.
Quote 9.8. Instinct is the nose of the mind. Delphine de Girardin, 1804 to 1855. Quote definition. Instinct functions for the mind as the nose functions for the body. It detects what rational analysis has not yet processed, identifies danger or opportunity before conscious thought arrives, and provides a form of knowing that precedes and sometimes exceeds logical reasoning. Quote application. In the work of building wiser, kinder communities, Instinct is the undervalued faculty that recognizes genuine good faith and genuine threat, responds to human need before the analysis is complete, and navigates the emotional and moral complexity that pure reason cannot always map. Trusting the nose of the mind is part of wisdom. Delphine Gay de Girardin was born in 1804 in Aix-la-Chapelle to a literary mother, Sophie Gay, herself a well-known novelist, and was immersed in French literary and intellectual culture from childhood. She was recognized as a poetic prodigy in her teens, celebrated by Lamartine and Victor Hugo, and became one of the central figures of the Parisian salon world of the 1830s and 1840s. She married Émile de Girardin, a powerful press magnate, and together they made their salon one of the most brilliant in Paris, attracting the leading writers, politicians, and thinkers of the era. She wrote under the male pseudonym Le Vicomte de Launay for years, publishing a celebrated chronicle of Parisian social life in her husband's newspaper that was widely read and widely admired by many readers who did not know its author was a woman. Her observation about instinct reflects both her deep engagement with French Romanticism, which took seriously the non-rational dimensions of human experience, and her practical life as a social observer who had spent decades reading people, reading rooms, and reading situations with extraordinary accuracy. The aphorism is characteristically compressed and vivid. It doesn't elevate instinct above reason or dismiss reason in favor of instinct. It simply identifies what instinct does. It sniffs out what the analytical mind hasn't yet seen, providing the first alert that something is present, whether danger or delight or deception. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Take seriously the non-analytical dimension of human knowing as a genuine source of information, not a distraction from reason. 2. Develop and refine instinctive responses through experience and reflection, rather than either suppressing or blindly following them. 3. Recognize instinct as especially valuable in complex social and moral situations where data is incomplete and speed matters. 4. Integrate instinct and reason as complementary faculties. The nose detects, the mind analyzes and decides. Delphine de Girardin herself was the most reliable kind of social intelligence. Quick, accurate, and humane. Her chronicles of Parisian life were celebrated precisely because she combined sharp rational analysis with an extraordinary instinctive feel for what was actually happening beneath the surface of events. She modeled in her own practice exactly what her aphorism prescribes, letting the nose of the mind lead, then following with the full analytical capacity to understand what it had detected.
How they work together as a unified philosophy to replace hate and guide a life with motivational education for all. The Courageous Service Framework. Foundation Layer. Collective Vision and Courageous Protection. Quotes 1-2. Lazarus. Ground all action in the recognition that no one's freedom is secure until everyone's is, making others' liberation inseparable from your own. Stanton. Claim courage as the foundational and irreplaceable protection, not institutional approval, social permission, or external validation, but the internal decision to act rightly regardless of cost. Together, establish both the scope and the engine of courageous service. Lazarus defines the scope, the whole of humanity, not just the familiar or the comfortable, while Stanton provides the fuel that makes action at that scale possible. Courage that protects from within. Without Lazarus, courage serves a too narrow mission. Without Stanton, the universal vision has no motive force to act on it. Integrity Layer. Transparency and Constructive Leadership. Quotes 3-4. Brontë. Operate with complete transparency. Honest people don't hide their deeds, and a mission grounded in truth must model what it preaches. Catherine II. Build and lead with skill. Praise publicly to elevate, correct privately to preserve dignity, creating conditions in which people are genuinely willing to grow. Together, define how courageous service conducts itself in daily practice. Brontë's transparency ensures the mission's integrity is visible and verifiable. No hidden agendas, no concealed methods. Catherine's method ensures that the people doing the work are led in ways that build them up rather than diminish them. Together they create a movement culture of honest visibility and humane leadership. Sustaining Layer. Goal clarity and principled opposition. Quotes 5-6. More. Keep long-term goals clearly in view as the compass that allows short-term problems to be endured and navigated rather than treated as terminal. Eddy. Reject hatred firmly and completely, but without adopting hatred as a method or an emotional state, so that the opposition itself does not reproduce what it resists. Together, provide the two most critical elements for sustaining long-term work in difficult conditions. Moore answers the question of how to keep going when the short-term picture is hard. Eddy answers the question of how to oppose what is wrong without becoming what you oppose. Goal clarity and principled non-hatred are the twin disciplines that make decades-long committed service possible without either burning out or losing integrity. Purpose layer. Humanity first and instinctive wisdom. Quote 7-8. Breedlove. Anchor everything in the first and highest duty, to humanity as a whole, not to any narrower loyalty, as the ultimate compass for all decisions and priorities. Desjardins. Trust the instinctive faculty that detects what reason hasn't yet processed, the nose of the mind that recognizes genuine need, genuine threat, and genuine opportunity before analysis arrives. Together, complete the framework with its deepest orientation and its most agile operating tool. Breedlove's Humanity First principle ensures that the mission never contracts into mere tribal advocacy. Desjardins' instinct principle ensures that the person serving humanity has the full range of human intelligence, rational and instinctive, available and integrated. Purpose without instinct is blind in the field. Instinct without purpose lacks the moral compass to direct what it detects.
Free Easy Extra Advantage Math, Spelling and Reading Workbooks you can download for free at stop2think.com or buy at educationstopshate.com. Free Easy Math Wisdom Workbooks with octo repetition to grow math self-confidence. You'll get plenty of repetitive practice of age ranges and averages of our 52 teams of 8 quote authors. Free Easy Alpha Cipher-coded puzzles teach letters, numbers, and phrases using antique wisdoms that encourage and educate. Can you decode this cipher quote of encouragement using either our Learning to Spell or just for fun instructions? And since time is money, practice reading faster with 52 teams of antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries. We offer printed versions and timed videos with background music. Sign up for free weekly emails of 52 teams of antique rival wisdom workbooks with easy math, spelling, and reading practice. And, if you'd like to get paid for sharing our wearable wisdoms, keep this in mind. Everyone I know wears a shirt, and most of us change them daily, so change your shirt and change the world. Social equalities are blatantly subliminal antique positive wisdoms repetitively shared without saying a word. This applies to all our wearable shareable wisdoms. Like pretty witty baby onesies and baby tees that you and others will see and read multiple times a day. The same is true with pretty witty kids, but they'll also share these wisdoms with anyone that can read at daycare or school. Youthful truths let your kids gain confidence sharing antique wisdoms with their friends. Imagine them sharing words of wisdom with classmates and teachers. I think, therefore I think tees I wear is a super easy way to share words of wisdom that have passed the test of time. Our social equalities help make us all wiser and kinder with blatantly subliminal messages promoting a more fair and equal opportunity society for all. And don't forget our giftwisdoms.com for birthdays and holidays that makes it easy to share the wisdom with clothing, coffee mugs, and magnets. So do the future a favor by encouraging, educating, and entertaining with words of wisdom that have passed the test of time to make us all wiser and kinder. With wearable wisdoms to fit babies, kids, and adults. You can clothe a whole family, city, or state. Join the 52 of 8 today.